to the state of our union as it stands now. In his speech last night, Barack Obama had this to say about our nation.
I can promise that a little over a year from now, when I no longer hold this office, I will be right there with you as a citizen, inspired by those voices of fairness and vision, of grit and good humor and kindness that have helped America travel so far. That's the America I know. That's the country we love. Clear-eyed, big-hearted, undaunted by challenge, optimistic that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. That's what makes me so hopeful about our future. I believe in change because I believe in you.
So has change we can believe in been the reality, or was it simply a slogan, especially for Black Americans? Joining me to discuss all this are Larry Watson. Larry's a professor at Berklee College of Music and a judge on the great WGBH's Sing That Thing. Good to see you, Larry.
Good to see you.
The Reverend Jeffrey Bound, one of the founders of Boston's 10-Point Coalition. Good to see you, Reverend. And Rahsaan Hall is director of the Racial Justice Program for the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts, also former deputy director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice, and former Suffolk County Assistant DA. Can I stop now?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Jeff Brown, let me start with you. 7 years in, how have Black Americans fared under the first Black president?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. I think on the one hand, you know, we had the first African-American president, and there's a lot of pride with that. We put him in again for another 4 years at unprecedented numbers, something around 98%. But if you look on the ground with a lot of the work that we're doing, and you talk to the average African-American, they're proud of him on the one hand, and on the other hand, they feel like that there's some things that should have been done.
Poverty rate up, income inequality up,
violence in the community, not enough spoken about gun violence.
What's your take on this, Larry?
Well, the music was better at the White House, I can say that. But I think that for my grandmother and my parents and others, it was a victory because it helped all of them to come to grips with the horrible lives they led in the South and others.
You mean just his election alone?
Just his election alone. It was, and I think for the general public, he and First Lady were so dignified and so incredible that symbolically, and Black folks' symbolism is important, that was important. But I think in terms of the larger agenda, he couldn't do it by himself, and I think the Congress never got over the fact that there was a Black president, and they didn't respect the office of the presidency. They were too busy concentrating on this Black man being elected, and it brought out all the worst in white people.
How about on the criminal justice front, where you spend a decent percentage of your time? What kind of grade does he get for that?
It's a marginal grade at best. I think he made a nice effort near the end by talking about reducing numbers of people incarcerated.
6,000 people released from federal prison.
Exactly, and so that's meaningful. But let's look at the gross disparities that exist in the prison system in this country and the conditions that lead to so many people being incarcerated in the first place.
You know, one of the things I was going to say I was shocked. I was not shocked. You know, he's always asked, "Do you have a special obligation to Black people in this country?" And his answer almost is exactly the same all the time. I'm the president of all Americans, not just Black Americans. Study out of the University of Pennsylvania after his first 4 years in office said he had spoken less about race in this country since JFK in 1961. Did he have an obligation that he didn't fulfill, Larry?
He did just what he needed to do,
What does that
because
mean?
also it means that the threats on his life were 3 times that of JFK and others. And so it was no way that he could even be palatable had he done more. I think in later years, he regretted that. I think this year now he's beginning to be a bit more outspoken, but people have every word, every syllable was being judged and dressed down, and so it was unfortunate.
How about you? What's your take on that? Did he have more of an obligation to focus on the community that probably gave him a higher percentage of support than any other constituency?
And I would say not just because of the skin color, but I would say of the unprecedented numbers that we had from the community voting for him.
I mean, pure turnout you're talking about,
pure
not just
turnout,
percentage,
you know, and the enthusiasm around it. We expected more. And, you know, you talk to young people under the age of 35, they'll tell you the #1 issue that we're facing in our communities is violence. And he did not speak a lot about that. And
what do you make of the fact that he did the gun thing in the East Room, which I thought was quite beautifully done Tuesday last week?
Yeah.
He then does this town hall, which I thought was staged, and I took away some of the beauty of Tuesday.
Yeah.
Guns were nowhere to be found last night in an hour-long speech.
Yes.
What do you think that means?
I think that, it was a great speech by Obama. Again, there's this sort of irony around the fact that the things that he does not talk about, also becomes the things that frustrate African Americans.
Is it, the old tired line, I'll use it and make it more tired if I can. Nixon has had to be the one to go to China. Is it possible, a la LBJ from 50 years ago, it's got to be a white president who makes more progress in the lives of black Americans than a black president or something?
I don't think it has to be. Practically speaking, whether or not that's what actually ends up working out, I think is something to be seen. I mean, going back to this question about whether or not he had an obligation, I would say firmly yes. It's because where and
The
when
special
he enters-
obligation of blacks.
Absolutely, because where and when he enters, the whole race enters with him, and so he carries that mantle for us. He has to be the one that's raising these issues.
But the ironic twist to that is that because he was an African American president, all of the negativity that comes from the majority community, gets rained out. I mean, all of the, the talk that's, really peppering the Republican, presidential race, sort of implies that, this president has done an absolutely terrible job. This president brought the country out of bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but you both, if I can, you both touched on something that I want to play something from last night, which was probably the primary takeaway line. Listen to it.
It's one of the few regrets of my presidency that the rancor and suspicion between the parties has gotten worse instead of better. I have no doubt a president with the gifts of Lincoln or Roosevelt might have better bridged the divide. And I guarantee I'll keep trying to be better so long as I hold this office.
I'm surprised he didn't get a standing ovation when he said rancor is at all-time high, because everybody would agree it is. But is it gerrymandering? Is it ideological divide, or is it the color of his skin?
He
Larry?
didn't need to fall on the sword. I believe that we don't like to talk about race, and it's still very much with us.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that, unfortunately, we need to concentrate. You raise a very interesting point, because many people
That's
still
a first,
believe
but good idea.
even black folks believe that white ice cubes are colder than black ice cubes. And so, in fact, it may take a white person to calm insecure white males and others to do some things that Obama had every sincere effort to do, but just was blocked out by mostly males.
So is the rancor primarily a function of whites in America still can't deal with the fact there's a black guy who's running the country?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, the other part of it is that he's a very progressive president, and we're coming in a time where you've got all of these latent issues around race yet to deal with. And then he's a black president, so every single day you get up in the morning and you see this president on television talking about something, within your community. And if you don't like that kind of stuff, then it sort of builds up this anger.
So is it about race, or is it about the fact that his politics, I mean, you touched on this a minute ago, are politics that a significant percentage of this country aren't so crazy about? Universal health care, those sort of things.
No, I think it is about race because, I mean, if you look at the Affordable Care Act, this is a Republican proposal that it started out with, and that's what we ended up with, but somehow it's bad policy now.
I mean, a la Mitt Romney.
Exactly, and so, but somehow now it's bad policy, and as far as him being a progressive, I'd push back on that because you look at the use of drones or look at the number of people who have been deported in this country more so than under the Bush administration.
Porter-in-chief, a lot of people think,
Exactly, and so he's really not that progressive. He's more middle line.
But I think
than
under
anybody
Obama,
else.
the veil was pulled off of the illusions of democracy
Sure.
and how this country really works. And I think this notion of race has always been forefront there. It's just that now we have smart cameras, and so now it's all being captured. But it's been talked about in your churches and talked about in the community since the 50s. None of that has really changed, and I think we place too much expectations on what he could do. Like I said, from my grandparents, for others, and even for me, I cried at that inauguration, watching all of that. It was a sense that we had vindicated all of those black folks who spent their lives fighting this victory. This
On that
battle.
note, we're going to end it there. Larry, it's good to see you.
Good to see
Sing
you.
that thing, my friend, Reverend. Good to see you. Son, thank you so much. Good to see you as well.